Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. Or shall we say, North American popular culture. Our guest today is Canadian. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer and engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Cool Shul Jewish Cultural Community, and Atheists United Studios. Hey, Joey. You like music, right? It's not a well-kept secret, not a secret at all, that Jews have played a major role in defining popular music since the 19th century. Many listeners have stretched their ears to hear Jewish inflections, specifically European Jewish immigrant inflections, in popular tunes of Tin Pan Alley, knowing that the majority of big and small-time contributors were Jews: Irving Berlin, the Gershwin brothers, Harold Arlen, Jerome Kern, just to name a few. An oft-told story has Cole Porter, a non-Jew, telling a friend that he was going to cash in by writing Jewish tunes. Hugo Friedhofer, a non-Jewish composer working in the equally Jewish world of film music, said that Yiddish is the Esperanto of show business, and it doesn't hurt to know a little. Meanwhile, some Jewish musicians, like today's guest, have looked inward, fusing identifiably Jewish sounds such as klezmer music, what we used to call Eastern European Jewish wedding music, with other vernacular styles: jazz, Afro-Cuban, hip-hop, punk, folk rock, heavy metal, reggae, you name it.
We're thrilled to have with us Joshua Dolgin, aka Socalled, a Montreal-based pianist, accordionist, producer, journalist, photographer, filmmaker, magician, cartoonist, and puppet maker. His collaborators have included, among many others, Itzhak Perlman, Fred Wesley, Andy Statman, Irving Fields, and Matisyahu. He was the subject of The Socalled Movie, a 2010 feature documentary produced by the National Film Board of Canada, and has a ton of music and music videos online for our audience to explore. Joshua, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
So I actually know the answer, having watched your documentary, but why don't you share with the audience how you got the moniker Socalled?
Well, it all goes back to the early 90s. In a little high school in Hull, Quebec, I was getting into making beats and getting into hip-hop. And I started working with this rapper kid from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Actually, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia is a very interesting story because it's actually sort of where the Underground Railroad ended up. It was one of the sort of sources of the Underground Railroad. And so there's this community that was called Africville that is now basically called Dartmouth. And so it's got this really big African-American community. And I was in a gospel band with the bass player was from Dartmouth. And he said, you got to start hanging out with my cousin, Tia, because he's getting into this rap music. I see that you're starting to make beats, and like, this was really back in the day using 4-track recorders, using really primitive samplers. And so I met this kid, and at the time I had a stupid like hip hop name, which was Heavy J in high school. Okay. And I was not heavy. I was not either physically heavy or musically heavy at the time. That was my stupid name, Ice-T, Snoop Doggy Dogg. Everyone's got to have a fun little hip hop name. But I started working with this kid who was kind of a real gangster, and we started working together, and eventually he just started calling me Socalled Heavy J. And then eventually we dropped the Heavy J, and I became Socalled, and it was nice that it was like a real organic way of being actually kind of named in a hip hop way. And it's sort of served me well. The name can really apply to a lot of things. If I do different projects, it can be, you just slap a Socalled in front of it and you're good to go.
That's awesome. So when and why did you become interested in making self-consciously Jewish music?
I grew up not religious, but going to synagogue, secular Jewish Canadian, Reform synagogue. So, I had a bar mitzvah, and we celebrated all the festivals. And culturally, I grew up in this little town north of Gatineau, which is called Chelsea. and we were literally the only Jewish family in this town. And so being Jewish was like, it was kind of cool. It was like nobody abused me for it. There wasn't enough Jews around for people to really make a big deal out of it. But I was the sort of different guy and my mother would come into school and like make latkes at Hanukkah or something. So like, everybody loves a latke. And so that was pretty cool. Like I was not like abused for that either. Like people loved to eat a delicious latke. And being a secular North American Jew, like no connection to a real historical, cultural sort of Jewishness. Sure, there was the latkes and the delicious food, and the beautiful ceremonies that are beautiful and satisfying and very deep, deep feeling that happens at a Seder table, or it happens with family celebrating and singing ancient songs. The only music that came out of that was interesting to me was the trope, was the like learning for my bar mitzvah. You could read this code in the text itself. There's this code, and you can sing this ancient melody. That was pretty cool. But I was into, as a kid, I was into all the music of my older brothers, which was like Tom Waits, or one brother was sort of into Tom Waits, the other brother was into like Def Leppard, and and I was into the music of my parents, just their record collections, and then I got into funk. My older brother got me this tape of the JBs, which is James Brown's band, and there was this sort of compilation record that went around in like a CD. This was like when people were sort of starting to reissue things. And so it was like a tape of a CD of the JBs. That's Fred Wesley and Maceo Parker and Pee Wee Ellis and the James Brown band. And that sort of became my favorite music. So through funk in high school, I got into hip hop. This was the early 90s. It was not the music of everything the way it is now. Hip hop has become all music, all pop has a funky beat on it. Even country and Western music has, like, the current country music has a fat, like 808 drum beat. It's like hip hop has become all popular music. This is a super vital music of today, of my generation, of the youth of today. And then getting into the whole culture of it, the art, the graffiti, the dancing, the breakdancing, the DJing, just this insane wellspringing of creativity in every direction, of young people without means, like people that just needed and wanted to express themselves, obviously coming from the like really the streets of America and often the ghettos, and coming out of sort of nothing and creating beauty with garbage, taking old sounds and turning that into gold, and making a dance floor out of a piece of cardboard, or trying to make the walls beautiful by spray painting them. So my friends and I were getting into this, and I'm this white Jewish kid in Canada, listening to Snoop Dogg and the RZA and NWA, and that's a little weird. But maybe it was because I was an Anglophone in Quebec. I was the only Jewish kid. Maybe sort of being an outsider kind of led me to that music, and also just the funk connection. It was funk, but it was funk being made today. So, and I was getting into music. I mean, I played piano as a kid, and I was playing in sort of local bands and like world music bands. For some reason, I started playing with a Venezuelan woman, and I started playing gospel. I was playing in a salsa band, and then in the salsa band, I met a guy who had a home studio. So I started to think about recording, and this was in a time when it was really harder to do that. Like now, you could do everything basically on your phone, but at the time, you sort of needed special machines. But even then, these machines were a bit more accessible than a fancy recording studio. And I could make my own beats. I could participate in this new sound. and then samplers, which actually take the actual old sound from any source, and then you're able to use those old sounds. And that's really at the heart of hip hop production. I started to try to find sounds that would tell my story. Hip hop is always about representing who you are, where you're from, representing your corner of the street, your part of town. So who am I? I'm this, Jewish, gay, white, Canadian, Anglophone guy in Quebec, in Canada. So there's lots of stories to tell there, or there's sort of a lot of myself that I can bring to the music that is a bit more honest than just trying to make funky African-American music, which isn't real. So I started to look at my parents' record collection, and there were a couple Jewish records in there. Not many, because secular Jews in modern America and Canada have assimilated, and they've lost all their culture. It's all out the window. So the only Jewish record we had kicking around was Theodore Bickel records. Somehow he managed to make a name for himself in popular American culture and still put out a Yiddish record or two here and there. And so I started to put a bit of that in there. My parents lived in Russia for a while, and so there was some Russian music. My parents lived in Chile in South America in the 70s, so there was some Chilean music and some Latin music. And then there was my brother's records with the heavy metal or the REM or the or the Smiths. And then there was classical records. So I started to try to put some of that into the hip hop instead of the obvious funky sounds. The trick with hip hop is looking for breaks, looking for these moments of rupture in songs where everything breaks down except for the drums, except for a funky little riff. You're looking for these funky isolated riffs. By the way, I was just thinking how that's over now, because with AI, we don't need breaks anymore. There's these new programs with AI that just isolate any sound magically, so you can have the whole drum track from any song. So that's going to fundamentally change hip hop and music production, because you're not looking for these little moments anymore. You could take any moment from any song, any vocal sound, any bass line. It's actually kind of mind-boggling. And I think, there's lots of potential. So, and then I moved to Montreal from this little town, and then I was in the big city. And so I really started collecting records, actively. And then I really started to find this treasure of our culture that has been forgotten, lost, killed, intentionally, unintentionally. And I started to looking for breaks, looking for samples, looking for these funky riffs. I started to find them in Yiddish theater records, in Klezmer records, in music from the Hasidic tradition, these nigunim, taking these melodies, from cantorial music from the synagogue. All of this stuff that I had never looked for or seen or heard before as just as a Jewish guy in Canada. It took hip hop to get me to start becoming one of those record collecting dusty guys looking through stacks for 25-cent records. And so, that's in a word how I got into this Jewish music and trying to make it today.
Well, thank you so much for that beautiful self story. Something you said early on kind of reminded me. A while ago, you posted something probably on Facebook, like, stop sending me Jewish music, people generally, like a public service. Just because it's Jewish and just because it's music doesn't mean I'm going to like it.
You've got to educate yourself. And so you can call it elitism, or you could just call it kind of knowing what's up a little bit and knowing the context and knowing the history. If you have never heard a rock song before and someone sends you the worst rock song ever made, you might think that's pretty cool because it takes some of the gestures of rock song, and you're like, okay, that's an interesting idea. But then maybe if you keep digging into rock songs, you'll start making choices and you'll start hearing, wait a minute, this one is put together a little bit better. And, oh, wait a minute, this guy's stealing from this guy. Like, you start to see the provenance of this stuff. So with Jewish and Yiddish music, first of all, it's hard to access unless you know where to go for it. So I don't really blame most people for frankly the ignorance, because there was a concerted effort to hide this stuff and to let it fade into the background, because with after the war, after the Holocaust that really destroyed the source of the culture in Eastern Europe and just killed all these artists and ripped that plant from the ground, people that had survived and had moved on to Israel or to North America or to wherever, Africa or Latin America, these Jews wanted to just, eventually they wanted to fit in, and then wanted to have peaceful lives and they wanted to survive. And luckily, in quotation marks, Jews could pass as white in North America, so they could assimilate, and they could just start participating in the non-Jewish world, or even creating new sort of avenues of creativity for non-Jew in the just American secular culture. And that's where you get your Harold Arlens and your Rodgers and Hammersteins, and that's where you get your Bob Dylans, and that's where you get your Steven Spielbergs, and all these Jews running Hollywood that don't make Jewish movies or ever have Jewish characters in their movies. So it's sort of an old story. But if you're interested and you scratch the surface, and especially now with YouTube and Spotify, and there's tons of access now. Before, you really had to fall upon old records by accident. But now you can really make a study of it. No problem. It's all been digitized. There's so many archives online. It's all there for the taking. But we've sort of been, we've been spoiled by a lot of terrible examples of the music because we forgot how to do it. So there was a couple generations of forgetting the art. It's really hard to play klezmer. Klezmer is a type of music that was developed for really 1,000 years, uninterrupted, played by virtuoso, dedicated families of musicians that handed down this incredibly intricate style, generation to generation, and handing it down improved it, like at every level, rhythmically, harmonically, melodically. It's all being honed and like perfected over generations. You're playing music that is super vital. It's for people to party to. They want to dance for a week. So you come up with the best tune, and then someone changes it a bit to make it a little better. And then you add a beat, and it's like, wait, what if we do this to it? Oh, that's even better. And what if you play this trill right here instead of over here? Oh yeah, that articulates the melody even better. So it's this unbroken chain. You listen to these old recordings of the music when it was a living tradition. It's like as great as any world music ever. It didn't take long to forget how to do it, and to forget why to do it. Like there was not the function anymore of dancing to that music at weddings or whatever. Like there was new technologies, there was new ways to dance. So people now have to relearn how to do it. Since the early 70s, these nerds were collecting old records and trying to relearn it. And there was even still a few masters still alive, so they could learn from the masters that were still alive. But it's been a bit of a slog to try to relearn it. And in the meantime, people heard it a bit and thought, "Oh, that's fun. I'll play it." And people do play it, and they miss all of the good stuff that makes it amazing. There's none of the phrasing. There's none of the ornamentation. There's none of the syncopation. There's none of the interesting harmony. It's just, you hear a simple melody, because actually the melodies are intuitively simple. And so you honk the melody, and then you go boom bop boom bop boom bop, and you wear a hat and a vest, and everybody goes, "Oh, klezmer, I hate it. Get it away from me. This is the worst thing ever." So no wonder people aren't curious to look into what it was when it was great.
So as you may know, I once had a band called Rabbinical School Dropouts, and we had an album on John Zorn's prestigious Tzaddik Records label, specifically the Radical Jewish Culture series. And basically, we were an eclectic, somewhat avant-garde klezmer group. We called it Esoteric Space Klezmer. That was our brand. But we really didn't see what we were doing as radical at all. Sort of to your point, we saw ourselves as just continuing what traveling klezmer musicians had always done, sort of collecting sounds and mixing them together and really reviving the stream that had been lost, as you're kind of alluding to. I wonder if you feel like you're doing the same with your work, kind of just continuing rather than being a rebel or a radical.
I guess a bit of both. Because, I mean, there's this famous clarinetist as in the revival named Friedmann, mostly based in France, from Israel. And his approach to klezmer and sort of relearning klezmer was that you just have to feel it. You just have to, open your Jewish soul and blow through your instrument, and all that Jewish soul will come out. And I'm skeptical about that, because to me, when you listen to old klezmer, it was a real style. It was not something that you just feel and you can just magically do, just based on your genetics or something. To really play klezmer is a microscopic scientific exercise in analysis and copying and practicing and transcribing, and to really get that style takes a lot of work. It's a job. If you don't know a style, you have to study the style. And so Friedmann, he comes along, he's just like playing with passion. He's a great musician, and it's very evocative, it's really effective music. He's a great performer. But it doesn't sound like the old klezmer that I like. I can like it for what it is a little bit, but what I really like is Dave Terrace. And if I want to play klezmer, I want to play like Dave Terrace and like Naftuli Brandwein, and I don't want to copy them exactly. I don't want to be Dave Terrace and Naftuli Brandwein, but I want to analyze their style to understand why it is they're saying the music the way they say it. Why do they phrase it that way? Why do they ornament it that way? And if you start to really analyze it and break it down, you start to see rules. You start to see, oh, look, in a niggin, they start they start, they don't go la 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 la. They start with maybe and then when they finish the niggin, they might end with a sound, and along the way they might go ya da da ya la la mama ya mama and like there's a way to articulate that melody that is so specific. In fact, it must be specific, because if you listen to a group of Hasidim singing, they're all doing it exactly the same. It seems random, and it seems like you could just sing it la 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 la, but they've come up with a way to perfectly enunciate that melody. And the same is true with a clarinet in old klezmer. So when I'm remixing and putting things together, which is a very Jewish tendency, and which actually created klezmer. I mean, if you also look at the history of klezmer, what is this Eastern European Jewish music? Yes, it is a mix of Romanian and Greek and Turkish and Russian and Ukrainian, and it's little bits of everything, and of the Jews moving all around. But it became a style. It became a cohesive style, much like the language of Yiddish, which is, people say it's like a mix of all these languages. Yes, that's true, but then it became an actual literary language that is very specific. So I feel like, and I feel like it's sort of what you are, you got to be honest about what you say you're doing. Like if I played my hip hop and said, this is klezmer, and I press play on my sampler and it goes, and there's a little clarinet on it or something, like that's just disingenuous. It's not That's not true. It's not klezmer. It might have klezmer elements in it. But for me, it's really important to do the homework. I mean, because like I don't just do hip hop. I also do traditional music, whatever that means. But I mean, I do like acoustic music. I sing songs or I play instruments. And in order to do that and not feel like an idiot, I've had to do a lot of work. I still feel like an idiot. By the way, I've been playing klezmer for 20 years, maybe longer, 25 years. I still feel like I'm just scratching the surface of being able to play it. It's like, it was such a complicated, crazy, all-encompassing cultural expression that you can't just drop into it and do it. So that's sort of my struggle with the music.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Dave Terrace. You know, he was known as the Jewish Benny Goodman, you know, both
That's
clarinetists, but Benny Goodman played like a goy, and, you know, Dave Terrace had the klezmer, you know, shtick and all that.
You've collaborated with amazing musicians over the years. Do you want to speak about any that have stood out for you in particular?
Some people I've worked with, I just got to feature on a song, like Roxanne Shante, like one of the godmothers of hip hop. Well, she was in Montreal. I took her to a studio and we made a song. It's called Work With What You Got. It was an unforgettable experience and she is so cool. And I think the song is pretty awesome. But after that, I never talked to her again. It's Boban Markovic, one of the great Serbian trumpet players. And he's like the greatest Serbian trumpet player in the universe. Probably the greatest trumpet player in the universe. But then again, I never talked to him after that. But then there's some people I collaborated with that became friends and became colleagues, and we went on to do many things together. I'm thinking of like someone like Gonzalez, Chili Gonzalez. I don't know if you know him. He's not that well known in America somehow, but he's a legendary, awesome pianist and producer. He produced a bunch of the Feist records. But mainly he's done these solo piano records that are awesome. And I knew him as a little kid, and then I met him again as an adult, and we've done stuff together. And so like that's an unforgettable collaboration. And then I don't know, someone like David Krakauer, who sort of really got me going in the music industry by hiring me to work with him and taking me on tour and just seeing the record business and going on tour in France and making many records with many different projects. That's like a lifelong collaboration. And then to meet my actual hero, like my most, like really my musical hero, the guy who got me into loving music, period, Fred Wesley and the JBs, to actually meet him, and not just for a featuring, that has turned into a friendship and a collaboration over the years. We've been working together now for 15 years and doing weird things together. Like I wrote these musical comedies with puppets. And so I hired Fred to write the overture for the musical. So like I sent him all the melodies. And so to become friends with this, like, he's really my favorite musician of all time. I don't enjoy other music more than the JBs in 1973 or Parliament. He also played with Parliament, and Bootsy and all that. And so that's probably my most like treasured collaboration. And I sort of pinch myself every time I get to work with him, because just musically on stage with Fred Wesley, like he's playing a solo and it's the greatest thing you've ever heard. Like it's just like you're working with the greatest musician in the world. Like, so that's endlessly exciting. And I can text him like in the middle of the night and we talk to each other, and I say, hey, are you watching the game? And he's like, writes me back. Like I say, happy Hanukkah, Fred. And he says, happy harmonica to you. Like, I don't know, we mess around. You know, in one of the best Fred Wesley lines, when we first started working on this thing called Abraham Incorporated, which is really the mix of Krakauer and Fred Wesley and me, and a funky klezmer mashup, but like built from the bottom up, like built for real. There in the Hasidic tradition, there's these things called nigunim. A nigun is a melody, and so working with Fred, there was a song, and I said, "Yo, check out this nigun," and Fred said to me, "What did you call me?" And that's sort of a classic Klezmer funk moment.
That's awesome. Yeah. On another note, if you would, you and I share an affection for kitsch, toys, VHS tapes, tchotchkes, ephemera, bric-a-brac, memorabilia, all that kind of stuff. I'm wondering if there's a method to your collecting, or if it's more haphazard, or somewhere in between, kind of like mine. If you have any certain things that you look for.
That's a question I've never been asked this question. Let me see. I mean, the method, really, to be fair, is that I look for cheap. Okay, I'm not on eBay scouring, like trying to find these baubles that I must have to complete my collection. I sort of live at the whim of public consumption. Whatever people have bought and then want to throw away later, I hope to be there when they're throwing it away.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. I'm primarily a swap meet thrift store person.
That's it.
Yeah, totally.
Would you like to speak about what projects you're working on these days? What's in the works for Socalled and your sphere, I guess?
So what am I working on? I just did music for a theater piece in Montreal, a French-Canadian theater piece, which was interesting to get a glimpse of this incredibly vibrant theater scene in my own city that I have there's really these two solitudes, they call it. Like there's a total break between English and French. Like you can totally live your life without speaking a word of French and vice versa. But that was a fun experience, and using some Jewish music, and a very Montreal story of immigrants, and so I wrote music for a trio, and they're playing it right as we speak. They're performing this show for like a month and a half with my music. So I just finished that. That was a good gig to have post-pandemic. I could sit at the piano and kind of work on it. I have some funny gigs this summer that I want to prepare for. You know Alan Cumming, the actor? So Alan Cumming somehow heard about me because of this cabaret festival and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, he asked me to come and perform at a cabaret festival during the pandemic. It got canceled, but then he has a club in New York City. So I'm very excited. He said, "Hey, why don't you come and do a show at my club in New York City?" So I'm going to be doing Kurt Weill music, which is one of my obsessions. So I've been shedding my Kurt Weill repertoire, sitting at the piano, singing Kurt Weill songs. I have a couple musicals on the go with various people. I also have these musicals that I've written that have never been seen outside of Europe that I really am trying to get happening. I'm working on a new record, like a new Socalled record, which I haven't done in a while, with like fat beats and singing and old melodies and all that mixing together. I just met this amazing Macedonian trumpet player who has moved to Canada. If you've ever heard of the Kočani Orchestra, they're like one of the great Balkan brass bands from Macedonia. And he's just moved to Canada. We did a gig. I took him to the studio. That was awesome. So new Socalled stuff. I have some 4-part harmony string arrangements that I did during the pandemic it's sort of a secret project, but lately I had this idea of, instead of playing strings, I made a record of me singing with Yiddish songs with string quartet. It's called Die Frosch. So I sort of made a whole new repertoire. Actually, Friedmann, when I talked to you first during the pandemic, when I was in this weird city, I was like really working on those arrangements. So I've got about 12 of these new old arrangements based on piano charts, based on choral arrangements from the 20s and 30s. But then I thought, hey, I don't know why, but I thought I want to play these on synthesizers, and I want to get a great singer to sing them. So I happen to live in Montreal, which has one of the great cantors in the world right now. His name is Gideon Zellermeyer. Do you know him, Jonathan?
Mm-hmm.
So he sings at like the fanciest synagogue in town. So I'm going to work on this project of Yiddish songs with synthesizer and cantor that I think will just sound really awesome. Kind of like a switched on Bach kind of thing, but not at all.
Have you heard Gershon Kingsley's Yiddish songs that he did like that? It's pretty cool.
I never heard his Yiddish songs. I have some Gershon Kingsley records, which are so weird.
Yeah, he did something similar with some traditional, like Oyfim Pripyatchik type stuff.
Really?
Yeah, it's definitely worth checking out.
Oh, yeah. I met him once. He was very rude and bitter. He was a mean man. He wrote the popcorn song, so it's okay. I forgive him.
Hey, you know, sometimes the meanest son of a gun will write the most fun, cheery music you've ever heard. Well, so-called Joshua, it's been great talking with you. We wish you all the best, of course. And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.